use this. We'll get a new query going.
Mostly used for maintaining integrity of the information in the database. Example, new record locating workers hours, employee information. Also create tables of tax and vacation salary. And also used for logging historical data and track employees' previous salaries.
They're really good for enforcing business rules that you can't enforce just by table structure. Does that make sense? So, like if you had a library thing where you could only check out 20 books, every time you did an insert to check out a book, it could go do a quick count how many books you have out. And if it was above a certain number, it could come back and say, sorry, you can't check this out, right? So I'm going to, I did this. I'm going to just do, as I said, a couple of dumb little triggers first, and then we'll try to do one that has some meat to it. So I'm going to create a trigger, and then we need to give it a name. I tend to triggers, TRs, I think is what I usually use. You can do whatever naming convention makes sense. I need to figure out what I'm going to do this on. As I said, it'd be really dumb. Let's do I'm just trying to think of something. You guys have any ideas of things we would want to do?
How about adding a new employee?
Well, we could. We already have a. What do we want to do when we add a new employee, though? No, they're not fired by a time.
Maybe if we change an employee's position, they get an automatic raise.
I guess we could do that. So let's do trigger change. I would not necessarily want to name it this in real life because it's so big. So this would be probably on update, right? Because you would be changing, you would go into employee position and you would update their position, right? So let's do, there's a couple of different things you can say. You would, after update, okay? After means that the update occurs and then you fire the trigger, right? We'll do another one which is instead of, and instead of intercepts the action. Like if it was an update, it would intercept the action and it would do it instead of the update. Does that make sense? So you can intercept that and you can go and do something else instead. Like you might take a delete. We'll do this in a minute. It could do instead of delete. And so when somebody tries to delete something, you could write it into a secondary table where somebody else could analyze it to decide whether it should actually be deleted. Does that make sense? It would give you kind of an undo because there's no, if you delete something, it's just gone. I mean, there are different things you could do. But this one, so we're going to give them a raise. We need to say for, that was bad. We're going to say for employee position. I hope that that isn't going to be, is it for or on? Let's try on. It is on. As, now a couple other things about triggers. They take no parameters because they execute without you being able to give any input, so they don't take any parameters. And it's always on a table. You have to have it on a particular table. I want go there, not on. Go. So you create a trigger, give it a name, put it on a particular table, and then you can say after update. You can also say after insert if you want. You can do multiples. So if I wanted to do after update, I could, and insert, I could do this. That would be perfectly legit. And it will fire every time there's an update or an insert right on that table. So we want to know what the position, I guess what we need is the employee key, right? From the position, employee position.
And position key. Probably in position. And employee, so it will depend on the employee and what their pay is.
I'm going to stick to update. So the employee pay is in employee. Well, another thing you can do with a trigger like this, we might remember the old Vincent's vinyl. If you sold an album, you could remove it or mark it as sold, right? That's another good thing that a trigger could do. But let's do real quickly. We'll just do, we need to know, we do need both actually. We need to know the employee key. And we need to know, oh, I'm doing these have to be after the as. And I need to declare a key for the position key. So I think what I want to do, we're going to select, and I meant to show this with a, so let's do employee key. Select employee key equals employee key. And this is a little bit weird, but we're going to say from deleted. All right. Anybody have any idea what deleted is? I don't expect you to. I'm just asking. So when you are doing a deletion or an update or a deletion, it creates a temp table in the temp database called deleted that stores the values as they originally were before the change. Does that make sense? We might not need the position key actually, but we'll put it in there anyway. Because we just really want to give the employee enough pay raise, right? But we can get that from the deleted. Now, if they're changing, as I said, I took the inserted. There's also an inserted table, which you can use. I'm actually, we can do this together if we want, if we do want the position key. Equals position key. And that would be comma, not a period there. So you can assign values with a select. As I said, I wanted to show you that with the store procedures, but I never did. And this will go from the deleted table, and we'll get the employee key that was there for the update, and we'll get the position key. Again, I'm not sure we need the position key because we're just going to give them a raise. Do you want to get rid of it or leave it in there?
Get rid of it if we don't need it.
Yeah, I don't think we need it because we're really just going to give them a raise. All right. So if we're going to do this, we could say just update employee annual salary. Actually, you have to update the table. Update employee. Set employee annual salary. Equals, what do we want it to do, 5%? Oops. Or do you want more?
No way.
Where employee key equals at employee key. Although I could put comments in there, probably should. So basically we're doing a trigger. It will trigger, it only works when a employee position is updated. And then we declare a variable to store this, our employee key. We get the employee key from the temp table that's in delete, that's called deleted. Then we're going to update the employee and set the annual salary to whatever it is times 1.05. If they're a volunteer, it's still going to be 0. Do we want to do anything with that? They change their position.
Give them a star.
Yeah, we could say if so if employee annual salary, which we don't have, so where am I going to get? We would have to do something like declare annual salary. And I think it's money. Boy, I'm having trouble typing. So I'm going to say we need to give that a value. So I am going to select at employee salary, annual salary, equals employee annual salary. Actually, so equals just employee annual salary. From employee, where employee key equals at employee key. So this one we're using the actual table. And then having done that, I can say if at annual employee salary or employee annual salary equals 0, then what do we want to do? So let's do update employee set employee annual salary. What do we want to start?
$1,000.
$1,000. Okay, so where employee key equals at employee key. This is becoming much more complicated than I meant for it to be, and then I'm going, this is the end of the if, so we got begin and end. And so let's just do this as else, right? They get $1,000 if they've got a 0 salary. Otherwise, we increase their salary by 5%. Does that make sense? Let me get this where I can get the whole thing on there. That is much more complicated than I meant this first trigger to be. But it's kind of a fun one. So the gist of it is that you do it for some event, and the events are almost always insert, update, delete. You can also do it on create and alter. We declare some variables. The salary, just because there are, like, of the 5 employees, I think 3 are volunteer. So if they're volunteer, they'll get $1,000. So we check their annual salary. If it's nothing, if it's 0, then we'll give them 1,000 and we're done. If it's not 0, if they've already got a salary, then we will increase their salary by 5%. It would also probably be a good idea if you were doing this to, instead of just typing in numbers here, to create some like constants. It's basically a variable where you assign a value to it so that they have a name. Does that make sense? I mean, that's just good form. You want me to do that? Or no? Okay. So let's create our trigger. So mine created successfully. Let me zoom so you can see where the trigger goes. So if you go over here, we have employee position, and maybe I'll go up even higher. Under, notice that there's a thing called triggers. Under that, every table has it because triggers are generally attached to a table, right? They're not uniform over the whole database, so generally attached to a single table. So let's see if this works. So let's look at, first of all, I'm just going to real quickly look at employee position. Oops. Yeah, okay. So we've got a couple of employees. Employee 1 has a couple of different positions. Let's look at the annual salaries too. Let's look at, just real quickly, select star from employee. So let's do employee 6 first. Update. So I need to go back to, so the employee 6 is position 5. So I'm going to, we'll add them to position 4. Update employee position. Set position key equal, what position? Let's say 3. I have no idea what 3 is, but we'll just do that. Where employee key equals 6. Okay. So if I run that, notice it has 2 rows affected, right? Because it also updated employee position, but it also updated employee. So if I run this, Employee 6, we should have made a point of looking at what it was before, but I think it was 21,000 before, right?
Like 20,000.
20,000, so it theoretically went up 5%. Let's try a position for employee 4, because employee 4 has no salary. Let's set their key to that, and we'll just do employee 4. So when I run that, it will do both rows affected. And employee 4 had a 0 salary, so now they've got 1,000. So it's working, and it fires every single time that there's an update, right? Every single time there's an update on that table, this trigger will fire. One of the things to be careful with triggers is that they can fire a lot. Somebody in the MySQL world where they're arguing whether they should add triggers, that he didn't like triggers because they were like popcorn. They could be like popcorn going off. One trigger could cause something that does do something that causes another trigger to go. For instance, we updated employee. We also updated employee salary. If I had another trigger on employee, this trigger could trigger that one. Does that make sense? And you could have triggers that trigger, and stored procedures can trigger triggers. So it can get really complicated if you're not careful, but they're really useful for ensuring certain things happen that your business rules want you to. Does not work.
I got an error. Update.
So you did update. Position 6 or 42%. Is there a position 6?
I think so. I could go position. There was, because wasn't he position 6? Maybe there's not.
No, I think it was employee key 6.
There's no position 6.
Well, you could do employee key 4, but I think if the position key may not be 6. I still think that might be.
Oh,
Because I think it's the position key. There it is. Now you could, I suppose you could put some try catches in here too, if you wanted. You know, and have some errors print out. Yeah. What is, so you want to update employee position, not select from.
These select from.
Yeah, you don't want to do a select from. That was just for me to see what was there.
Oh,
You need to do this.
okay.
You need to update it. Yeah.
Okay.
This only fires on update. We're going to do one that fires on. Let's do a real quick delete thing, and then just to show you instead of. Triggers can be annoying though. If I make it so you can't delete, you just can't delete, right? So we'll just do a couple additional triggers, and then I'll let you guys work on these. Again, these are pretty much, the logic of them is a lot like the stored procedures, except you can't have any parameters. You can't put in any arguments because they're responding to an event. And that they are responding to an event, and they always relate. They're always fired by an event on a particular table. So let's just say that we don't want you to be able to delete any person without thinking about it. So I'm going to, I'll do a go. I'm going to say create trigger. and we'll call it tr delete person. And we'll say on person. So you have to say what table. And I'm going to say instead of delete. So what it'll do is it'll intercept the delete command, and it will do whatever we want to do with it, but it won't actually do the delete command. Now, having done that, you could in here say if everything's good, go ahead and delete. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it write it to a new table, which I'm not sure how smart that is, but that's what we're going to do. So, and then somebody could review that table and decide if they really want to delete. Although you might have to turn off the trigger to do it, to delete it, which you can do. You can suspend a trigger. So I am going to do, first of all, I'm going to say if not exists, and do select name from sys.tables and where name equals, what do we want to call it? Proposed deletions. It's what we want to call the table. I'll just call it deletions. So if this doesn't exist, we want to create it. So we do begin end. And I'm just going to create table. And you could possibly do these as a temp or whatever, but I'm going to. And I'm just going to get all this stuff from person. Let's just go looking up here for the table person. There it is. And I'm just going to grab the columns. And push these down. I don't need their password and password seed, so I'm not going to put those in there. All right, but I do need to give these data types. And I think this is date time, right? Yeah, date time. So if the table doesn't exist, we'll create it. And then what we're going to do is basically we will insert into deletions and all of these fields. Person key, person last name. I'm just breaking the line to keep it online. Person email. Person entry date. And we'll do it by select these same fields. From what?
47. 947.
I do indeed. So what this will do is anytime we attempt to delete a person, it will move that person's name to this temp table where we could, it's not really temp because it has persistence, but to this table where we can check on it.
Oh, you got another one in the 49.
Yeah, same thing because I copied it. Thank you. No, I'm not sure this is a smart thing to do, actually. It's just to show how an instead of trigger works. Because if you did want to come back and delete it, it would, you'd have to suspend this trigger or just throw it back into the temp table again. The other thing I'm not sure of with this is if there's referential integrity issues, will it just throw the error anyway? So let's do, I'm going to create the trigger, and it's happy with that. I'm going to real quickly do select star from person. I think at the very end, do I have anybody that doesn't have referential integrity issues? Let's go to the bottom. Richard Burton, but Richard Burton does have an email. I'm going to select from person. I'm going to try to delete from person where person key equals 133. Now, I don't know if that'll cause referential issues. It didn't because the deletion never actually occurred. Notice it has 2 rows affected. If we look in over here, let's do our tables. I'm going to refresh tables. And we now have a table called deletions that has all those things, which didn't exist before. And if I select star from deletions, I should have Richard Burton there. Now I have duh. I guess that's a different person. But that's the person we tried to delete. So if I tried to delete, let's see. So now I have those 2, Joy and Dexter. So those are people that have people have tried to delete. And theoretically, then an administrator could do that. And if they wanted to delete one, first of all, they'd have to delete the child tables, but you can also, I think it's suspend trigger TR deletions. Suspend. Oh, is it alter table? I might have to look this up. I mean, I know we could drop it. I don't want to drop it. We're going to do one more trigger after this, and then we're going to let you guys work. Disable trigger. Let me just look and see if disable works. So I'm not even sure if I need to alter the table. Just doesn't like disable. Did anybody see the syntax faster than me? Disable trigger. Oh, you have to say what table. What else was
I
there?
put alter table. I left my alter table in front of it before I put that, and it was alter person
Right.
or alter table person.
And then just get rid of that and
Yeah,
do
and then
disable. Yeah.
It didn't have any errors pop up.
Well, and if we run it, didn't like it. Alter table failed because trigger deletions. What did I call it?
The trigger you made.
Delete person. And that worked. So theoretically now, if I were to delete, I could delete it. Although I think I'll get a referential integrity error. Right, because there's a child field for that. But it actually went there and tried to delete it. So, and then I think you can do the same thing with enable. So I'm just going to do this. And just instead of disable, I'll do enable. And I believe that will work. So now the trigger is back. So, I mean, if you're going to block all deletes, you might want to disable the trigger once in a while. So this would disable the trigger and this puts it back in effect. And so if I were to run this again, it does the 2 rows affected. And then if I select from deletions, I didn't put any. So somebody really wants to get rid of John Doe. It's interesting I'm not getting first name. Why am I not getting first name?
You didn't put it in your.
In this part? Oh, I didn't put it in the select. But I did put it up there. Not that it matters. Again, if you want to alter these, you have to go up and do alter trigger. And sometimes I've found that alter trigger has troubles. Let's see if it does now. Sometimes I've found I have to drop the trigger and then add it again. It worked okay. Whoa, hit the wrong thing. Yeah, now it's getting the first name. So it's Jennifer Doe, not John Doe. Okay. All right, one more trigger. This one actually could be useful, I guess. Or do you guys have enough? Do you want more examples, or do you think you have enough? One more? Okay. I'm going to do one on insert, and I'm going to do it for the grant request. One of the business rules is that grant requests are supposed to be reviewed within some X number of amount of time. Let's see if it's in the business rules. All requests must be reviewed by an employee within 48 hours. All right, so what I want to do is make like another, kind of like we did up above where we create a table. And it would make more sense actually to create these tables ahead of time and just have them there rather than have the trigger create them. But we'll do it within the trigger. We'll create a table. We'll basically whenever there's an insert into grant request, we will put a little bit of information about that request and the due date for it to be reviewed by. Does that make sense? That actually could be semi-useful. So this will be our last. So basically what we're going to do is we'll create a trigger that gives the date by which a grant request should be reviewed. You could do something similar, I suppose. If you could give a due date for a bill 30 days or something. You could probably put a due date for it in there. You could also do a stored procedure that you run once a month that goes through and finds anybody that's overdue. All right, so I'm going to do create trigger. I'll call it TR grant review dates, date due. My names are really long and awkward, I know. It's going to be on grant request, and it will be after insert, because we'll let the insert occur. We're not going to stop it like the instead of. We'll do as. As is always the start. It's sort of like the name of this is grant review date due, and everything after the as, it's all an alias, right, for the code after the as. You think of it as aliasing? I don't know. They always start these functions with as. I was looking at Postgres, by the way. I don't know if you've ever played with Postgres SQL. They call triggers, stored procedures, and functions, they just call them all functions. And what differentiates them is whether it's on an event or it's, returns a value or not. If it's a function that doesn't return a value, it's a stored procedure. If it's a function that returns a value, it's a function. If it's a function that is triggered by an event, it's a trigger, but they just call them all functions. The code is similar though, except for that, except they don't differentiate the types in the name, which is interesting, I guess, vaguely. So what we want to do, we've got an insert. So we could do this again if not exists. This would just be a safety thing. As I said, typically the table, you'd probably want to recreate it beforehand. So I'm going to say select name where or from sys.tables where, let's break that, where name equals, what do we want to call this table? To review. So if the table doesn't exist, then we want to create it. And I will do create table to review. What do we need to know? We need to know like the grant request key, right? I'm going to go back up one. Grant request key. What else do we need to know? The grant request date. I think that's date time. Grant request our grant type key we might want to know. We really don't need to know a lot about it. I mean, we can look it up, right? Once we've got this, we can look up the details of it. We just need to know that it has to be done. So I'm also going to put in review to review by date, which is again one of my horrible, and I'm just going to do date for that instead of date time. Do I want to do date time? What I'm wondering about, because I'm going to do some math when I add the 48 hours. Would date and date time, would it complain about mixing the two things? So I'll leave date time in there. Okay, so we got that. That's going to be our table. So we want to insert into to review, and basically we'll just get those, grant request key, grant request date, grant request grant type key, and to review by date. Okay, so we're going to do those. What?
I thought she said three.
Oh.
Oh,
So I'm going to select. Actually, does that work? I think before we do the insert, I'm going to do the math. Well, it might work with the select. Maybe we can do the math there. So we want these same fields. So grant request. Okay, and then I think, so what we want to do here is date add. Let's do this on the next row. Date add. The interval, I want to try hour. We're going to do the increment is 48, and then the date is grant request date. And I'm going to do this from inserted, which is one of those temp tables again. Now, I'm not sure why it's complaining. This is what I'm not. There it goes. Will this work? So we're basically just inserting this into it, and part of what we're inserting is this date add. Did we use the date add function before? Date add adds dates, and you say what the unit is. Like if I put year, it would add a year. It would add 48 years at that point. If I put in days, it would add 48 days. So I could put day 2, right? I could put 2 days. So I said within 48 hours. Let's see what happens. I'm going to go up. It's happy with that. So let's see if we can insert a date and see what our new grant and see what happens.
First one I see what is to begin with before we mess with it.
To see what?
The first one I looked into like select star.
Well, we could, although it should. I might do that just to see what the fields are, but it shouldn't matter because this is going to be a new one. This is on inserted,
okay.
so it shouldn't matter what data is there. So I'm going to do insert into grant request. Okay, and I'm going to get all the fields for grant request. So grant request key we don't need because it's auto numbered. I will break these others. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. I just want to get them on screen. And then I'll do values. So the grant request date will be today. Get date. The person key, I don't know, randomly 121. Grant type key, I'm hungry, so let's do one for food. Grant request explanation. Didn't have a good breakfast. I don't know. You know, if you ever want to do you can escape it like that. I want a really good breakfast, so I'm going to say $200. All right, so let's see if that will insert. So notice it did 2 inserts. That's a good sign. So if I do select star from grant request, and we go to the bottom, didn't need a good breakfast, grant type key, it's all there, right? It's a 90-second request. But it should also be there for to review. So I'll do select star from to review. And it's there now. It is a table now. And there it is. And the date that it's due, so today is the 3rd, you know, is the 1st of March, and it's due on the 3rd of March by 11:05. Does that make sense? Because we said the business rules, they should all be reviewed within 48 hours. So it added 48 hours to the current date. Now again, making the table in the trigger is probably a bit excessive. You should just, if this table is important, then you should just do that, right? Does that make sense, though? I mean, they're just to kind of see how triggers work. And again, the thing about triggers is that they are wonderful for enforcing business rules that you can't enforce just through table structure. They actually don't take up very much. They don't interfere too much with efficiency and processing, you know, and things, but you can get an overkill on triggers. So you want to make sure you use them judiciously and not, you know, make thousands of them. Couple other things about triggers. So there's one of the reasons I wanted to do an insert, there's 2 temp tables that you can access. They only exist mid-transaction, but a trigger is in process. It's in the transaction, right? It's part of the transaction. So those 2 tables are deleted. Whenever you update or delete, the the deleted table holds the old values, right? Then it writes the new values. So there's a moment in which there's two copies. Basically, there's the old and the new. You know, the values being changed and the value being added. For the update, for the delete, it's just the values being taken away. And then there's the inserted table, which keeps temporarily holds the insert before it writes it to the database. And you can access those from triggers when you're in process. And again, your limits on triggers are you can do whatever makes sense in your database for that. I think the assignment, has anybody looked at it? I think I only had you do one trigger. So let's go to Canvas.
It says create a trigger to fire when an employee is assigned to a second shift in a day.
All right.
To an overtime table. The trigger should create the overtime table that exists. Add an employee for 2 shifts to test.
Right. So basically, it's just one trigger. What you want to do, don't worry. One of the things I didn't say about triggers too is they have no effect on previous data. Right. So if you do like in Metro Alt, if you add an employee to a new shift, so that'd be an insert. So you want to do this on after insert. It won't go check to see about the past employees. Right. It's purely at that moment in that transaction that it checks. It doesn't check all past. Because if you did that, you'd have a lot, because a lot of employees are working double and triple shifts in the Metro Alt. But basically what you want to do is you want to insert an employee to a new shift and then insert them into the next shift on the same date. Right? Because you want your trigger to check by date. And make sure if they're doing more than one shift in one day, then put them in that overtime category. Does that make sense? Basically, you just need to count how many times they show up that day. Yes, you're not firing the employee. That's actually a pretty good pun. I'll have to remember that one. So I think I gave you enough to do that. It has a little complication, but basically you do it on insert. You just count. When you do the insert, you see how many there are for that day. Now, what you count, you can get the value of the employee key from the insert and the date, but what you're counting is in the table to see if there's any more than one, basically, right? So if the count of employee key where that date is equal to the date from the inserted table is greater than 1, then they're working overtime. I'll help you if you need. Yeah. Yeah, it should be. So the insert should be insert in the overtime. Right. So and then it selects all of that. And then you get that. Yeah. And then, yeah. Yeah, they should. That should. Let's
I've got a bunch of times here.
And it hasn't been.
It hasn't.
Right. Let's look at, so you said if the table doesn't exist, right? What table would you, when we put this on table?
On it search for a while.
Yeah.
After I watched you do that, that's why.
Well,
Today.
yeah, on search. So I have seen this before. So that-
Um,
Oh, you know what? I think I know why. Yeah, get rid of. Right after. That could be it. You have to alter it. Alter it. That's fine. We have to, let's see. What are you doing? What's the time? Yeah. One,
Thank you.
yeah. It doesn't hurt to see. If you look at the logic. Yeah, good. I'll copy all this to the blog and I'll stop the video right now too, while I remember.